Welcome to The Real Tea. I'm your host, Tammy Murphy, broker owner of RH2L, bringing Miami Valley real homes to love.
And I'm Ellie Sollenberger to give my perspective as a home buyer.
We're going to give you the key to Miami Valley real. And we are here. We're back, as they say.
Yeah. So we have had a major change in real estate, and it is all over my For You page on TikTok.
Gee, I can't imagine what that's about.
Right. So can you kind of clue me in on when changes happened? All I hear is buyer-broker agreements.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about this early on when that announcement was first, when the settlement was first announced, that this was going to cause some changes, and that magic date was August 17th. So by August 17th, the DOJ settlement with NAR went into effect, meaning that every brokerage realtor in our country is now obligated to follow these new rules, right? And the new rule that comes out of this settlement is regarding compensation for a buyer broker through the MLS listing services that realtors use to advertise homes that are for sale. That's the grand scope of what the settlement is about, is that we are no longer permitted to put compensation for the buyer's agent through our MLS system. No form of compensation is to be put into the MLS itself. So as a listing agent, you make the arrangement with the seller that you're going to market, advertise, and try to secure the sale of their home. And they make an agreement, or have all this time before made an agreement, that as part of those sale proceeds, a portion of that would be covered for the listing agent's services, the listing commission, and they also would accommodate for the buyer broker to be paid out of those sale proceeds of the house itself. And that compensation was considered a cooperation between a listing agent and a potential buyer broker. And in the MLS, it would be listed, and you as the buyer's agent looking for and sending properties to your buyer. If your buyer says, yeah, that's 123 Main Street looks good, let's go take a look at it, the buyer broker would already have in the MLS system what was listed as their compensation based off of the arrangement that the listing agent had with the seller. So kind of two sides to this. It made it nice and easy because it was all simple. It was there. It's not like subjective to anything. And obviously, it's always been negotiable, because if I was the buyer's agent and we brought a less than what the seller was willing to sell it for or advertised for, we're going to negotiate what terms affect that, finally getting to an accepted contract.
So before this lawsuit, as a seller, you could not pay commission.
You did pay.
I know, but you could not. If you decided, like, I don't have the money in it, I need all of the proceeds from this house. But you would have to have the realtors agree to that.
Correct. And I can tell you from years of it being in this business, many, many times, if there was an issue, you have a short appraisal, you have the buyer change their mind, you have inspection issues that all of a sudden was going to cost more money than either party really accepted or realized, or the appliances actually weren't included. Many, many, many of those times, you're at the table as the realtor, you're like, let's keep the deal together, I'll throw money in, I'll reduce my fee, I'll do this. And whether you were on the listing side or the buyer side, I can tell you, if the realtor was in that position, most realtors are compensating or reducing in order to allow that deal to still close. Okay. So what's negative about this is that it's set this false narrative that the realtors are the bad guys, and they've been taking advantage of the people in getting paid this outrageous amount of money. So I'm going to set the record straight, because that's not true. Many times doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. There are always bad apples in something, right? But for the most part, realtors are the piece that kept the deals together, that did what was necessary in order to make that happen for either the listing side or the buyer's side. So where there was failure is when an agent working with a buyer didn't do a good enough job explaining to the buyer how they were getting paid. So if they didn't use a buyer-broker agreement, and some states actually did not require that document in the proceedings, right? As a listing agent, you have to have a signed listing agreement in order to put that into the MLS, in order to advertise it, in order to get paid. So that was a solid everywhere. Everybody knew that was the rule. But on the buyer-broker side, if your state didn't require it, then agents weren't using it. I learned it as this is the basic way. You want an agreement with your seller, so you obviously want an agreement with your buyer. Makes sense to me, but this is how this case came about, was that there were buyers who didn't understand, oh, wait a minute, you mean you get paid in order for me to buy this house? Well, maybe you got one of those bad apples, and maybe that agent was only showing you houses where they were making X dollar amount. So if
Which is called steering, right?
correct.
Okay.
And so if they did that, then they were wrong. They were in violation of their real estate licensing laws. But you get this compilation of things that are going on. So you have the buyer side who maybe doesn't realize how their agent's getting paid. And what brought DOJ back into this discussion again was that sellers realized, wait a minute, why am I paying for the buyer's agent? Like, I shouldn't be paying for them. They should be paying for their own. So that pushback in Missouri is what caused the DOJ to come back. Mind you, 25 years ago, the DOJ and NAR had entered into an agreement, and we made changes based on that agreement that didn't change everything, but clearly identified some of this, right?
Yeah. So this started in Missouri,
So the settlement case is out of Missouri, yes.
not even like California,
No.
where home prices are ridiculously higher than everywhere else.
And that's the reality. And, you know, we've had a number of title companies and lenders and all the parts to this process brought in here to have a conversation.
Yeah.
The real estate commission that gets paid off of it, first of all, is really a compensation agreement that everybody comes to terms with. Okay, so you have a conversation with me to list your house. I'm going to tell you what my services are going to cost, right? But I'm also going to say, here's what we're going to pay the buyer's agent in order for them to come in. If that wasn't sufficient for the buyer's agent to do the job, they always had the liberty to have that buyer-broker agreement where their client would then pay them an additional fee.
Yeah.
I use a buyer-broker agreement. My terminology was, if I'm getting compensated in the MLS, then that's sufficient for my needs. I could make it, well, if it's not sufficient for my needs and this seller decides that they're only going to offer this amount, then you have to pay the difference. But I've never in my 23 years gone back to a client and say, oh, that seller didn't pay as much as I wanted, so you need to pay me the difference. Because the goodwill that I have for my client is whatever home is working for you, fits your needs, I want to make sure we're getting it. And if I'm getting paid this or this, then yes, I'm willing to accept that because it's not coming out of your pocket directly.
Yeah.
It's coming out of the proceeds of the sale, which means I'm vested to get us to close. Listing agent doesn't get paid until it closes. So everything was arranged in the original system so that all parties would come together and agree and get the property sold. And
Yeah.
then everybody get paid. Now you've opened the floodgates of, first of all, NAR rule, the new settlement changes, no longer compensation can be listed in any MLS, nowhere.
So I've seen on TikTok, brokerages just put it on their website.
Yep. Because you have to put, here's the thing. We went to an automated showing time service so that I didn't have to answer my phone at 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night if somebody wanted to show a listing tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
They were able to automatically go into the system and schedule through a nice, easy portal,
Yeah, I remember using it, and then you just approve it.
and then you approve it, or it's automatically approved or whatever. But now, agents who don't answer the phone because whatever else they have going on, if they're in this part-time, they're working a side hustle, or they just have life going on, right?
Yeah.
They're not answering their phone 24/7. Now, if you want to show a house, you first want to know, are you going to get paid, right? So the seller still can pay for the buyer-broker fee. It's now up to the buyer agent to call the listing agent to ask, is the seller compensating the buyer side? And because that door has been opened, you have pushback from the seller saying, well, no, I don't want to pay it. Why would I pay it? Let their agent get paid by their buyer, right?
Yeah.
So what we're going to see is how this is going to affect the market already when we have schools and elections going on.
Yeah.
Things that typically spur and slow our market, we already are dealing it, but now you've changed everything.
Yeah.
So before I can schedule these appointments to show the 5 houses that we want to see, I've got to call the 5 different listing agents and have a conversation or leave a message or send a text or send an email. Hey, I want to show your house, but I need to ask, is the seller offering compensation for the buyer broker? Now, you might think that's not a big deal, but if you as a buyer are coming in to buy a house, you already knew you had to have a down payment.
Yeah.
Whether it's 3.5%, 5, 10, 20%, you know that money.
Yeah.
You also have an idea because we've talked about what your closing cost potential is, right? So that's anywhere from another 3% to 6%, whatever. Depending on the size of the house, where it's at, and all that's going on, you need to at least bank on about having 10% for the minimum down or more if you're going to do more of a down payment as your cost out of pocket to be able to buy this house.
Yeah.
On top of that, now you got to pay your broker directly. So most of the loan programs aren't allowing that fee to be tied in like they do with the lender fees or some of the title fees. So some of these costs that would be out of pocket now has escalated to this. So let's say you're buying a $100,000 house, and let's say you were going to offer maybe 3% or 2%, whatever that number is. If it's 2%, you were going to pay $2,000 to your realtor to represent you through this process.
Mm-hmm.
But now, instead of that being rolled into the loan over a course of 30 years, you probably don't want, you have to pay an additional $2,000 out of pocket for that realtor services. If you are just coming into this market and you're already paying higher price point and you're paying higher interest rate because we're no longer at 3%, to now feel like you have to pay additional money out of pocket in order to get it, it's pushed a lot of buyers back to say, I'm not going to do it. So if you as a buyer don't want or don't have the means, aren't willing to pay for your realtor, your choice is to not use a realtor, which is bad because we serve a purpose for you as the buyer. We represent your best interest. We give you a third party, non-emotional role, right, to make sure that the process is being followed, that your rights are protected, and that you know what that process is. So we serve as your advisor through this. But if you are making a financial decision, well, I'll just do it on my own. I'll just go to the listing agent and see what they can help me with. Technically, listing agent can't represent you unless there's a dual agency.
Yeah.
And then they become neutral. So are you really going to agree to that, or are you going to say not do it at all, not buy, or not have representation? If the listing side, the buyer, the seller, if the seller wants to make sure they're being covered and they have representation, they're going to pay for their agent. So why wouldn't the buyer want that same right?
Right.
So that's the pushback that we have as professionals in this who've done it over the course of years and seen the good and the bad of everything. Could there have been changes to the system to make things better? Yes. But I think that the change that was made is so dramatic that it causes, first of all, so much confusion to the public. The disservice is absolutely to the buyers. And the hardship is making sure that people know what is legitimate facts, rights, and opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the buyer doesn't get representation, does that reduce what the listing agent's getting? That depends on the language that they've written in their contract with the seller. So it may or may not save them money. But what it's likely going to do is if you have less buyers coming through, let's say you would normally have 100 buyers looking for this type of property, but now you are only not offering any compensation to the buyer side. If 10% of the people are prepared to pay for their own service to their realtor, then you just went from 100 to 10 who's going to come look at your home. So as a seller, it's not the wise thing to do to say that you're not compensating for it, because you've gained the equity, you've got money in the house, and to make the sale, this is kind of like the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
You know that you're going to cover, that's the fee that needs to be done, and you still win, because our realtor data over 110 years shows that we bring more to the table for those sellers. They're making more than what our services are costing them. So in the grand scheme of things, let's just throw it all out, baby included in the bathwater, right? And let's start with this uneven, obscure, got to make phone calls. You have to have this signed before you even know me. If you want to see a house, before we build a relationship, here, I need you to sign this buyer broker agreement, because I can't show you the house until I have this signed. Well, that defeats the purpose of why we were saying we build and create relationships, and agency is there to protect you.
Yeah.
So before you can see the house, you have to sign this form.
So do you think that there'll be more open houses?
And open houses is one of those things where if the buyers are coming in, and otherwise, if they're working with a realtor, they can't see the house unless they sign an agency agreement. Why are they able to come in freely at an open house where there isn't agency? So either we're going to see more open houses take place because that's going to be a way for people to get in, or you're not going to see them because it's still vague as to what the rule requirement is. As the listing agent holding the open house, you represent the seller. You don't represent the buyer or any potential prospect coming in. But part of your marketing has always been that you hold an open house so that people have free access to come in and look.
Yeah.
But if they ask you questions, suddenly you've got agency, form requirement, and this and that. And you're not going to do that in the middle of an open house.
Right.
It's just so confusing as to what's going on. But being able to get the listing agent to answer, is the seller compensating? I'm going to put it up on my website, so when you send me the message you want to show my house, I'm going to send you back a text message that says go to our website to see how this is compensated. And then you either see that the house is offered compensation from the seller, or you see that it's not, and then it's a conversation that you have with your buyer. If it's not offered for compensation, does that mean you don't want to see it? Or you want to move on and you're just going to cover me and we see everything that's out there. If we get it paid by the seller, great. If we don't, then we know it's on you.
So I saw one of the skits on TikTok. This guy calls the other agent, says, "Are you offering buyer broker compensation?" The guy says no. So he says, "Okay, well, we're not going to see it." And the guy says, "Well, I'm going to report you for steering, and that's unethical." And he said, "It's no different now than if my buyers were looking for a house that has three bedrooms instead of 2 bedrooms, or 3 bathrooms instead of 2 bathrooms. And now that has just become something else that a buyer really needs to pick out. Like, I only want to see houses that this is being offered."
Correct. And that's why the form that they sign is very specific, at least in our area. I can't speak for everybody, because every association or every brokerage company may have formulated their own version of these forms in order to comply, right?
Yeah.
But in our area, it's very detailed and specific. If it's a level of compensation, a dollar amount, or if it is a flat fee, or if there's a retainer fee involved in order for the buyer to get showings but not know, because they don't have to buy something. They could just be looking. So is a realtor services free? No. And that's where this started back when they tried to clarify, is the clarification that realtor services are not free. So realtors who offer free use of this truck if you buy or sell with me, well, then that's not free, because you're buying or selling with them. So there is fee compensation that's going on. And that clarification was supposed to have taken effect, and we still see violations of that. So because it's not clear cut, and because people always look for the workaround, that's the issue, is that it has to be easy and right for the consumer, first of all. As an industry, I can tell you it's inconvenient for me to have to make 5 phone calls, whereas before all I'd have to do is set it up in the showing. I already knew the details of the house through the property listing, not a big deal. But now I have to go to try to make these calls. And let's say they're busy. They don't answer the call. Let's say they're out of area. They don't answer their call. Does that mean we show it or we don't because we don't have an answer to this?
Yeah.
That's the big question that I have to have with my clients as the buyer to say, here's where we don't know something. So these 2 houses answered and we know that the sellers are compensating. These 3 didn't answer or the seller said no. If you don't want to see these, then we're down to 2 out of the 5 that we thought we had as options. And
But
that's going to build up.
So then when you put an offer in on a house where it's not stated originally, like offering 2%, then you can put that as a negotiable term.
So there's been a long debate in real estate. The purchase contract is an agreement between the buyer and the seller. The commission for the realtors was an agreement from the seller to the listing agent, who then makes an agreement for the buyer agent.
Okay.
So when somebody would write on a contract, purchase a buyer's agent to be paid, or however they wanted to do that, that's an agreement by parties that really don't have that control.
Oh.
So that was why that didn't work before. Now, with this advent coming on of we don't have it in the MLS any longer, now there's an addendum that can be signed that actually spells out this is the buyer offer so long as their agent is being compensated, or the seller can counter and say that they're willing to only offer this amount, or depending, it's not the full purchase price, so we're not going to offer what we thought we would offer, we're going to offer this instead. And now I think that it's opened the door for more confusion instead of clear, correct, and direct understanding of what's being agreed to for the purchase of the property. We've now opened the door to where it's going to be an attorney battle. That's not what I understood. Well, that's what we said. Here's what the form says. And because it's all new, there are going to be lots of people who question it.
Yeah.
To me, the bigger concern for the consumer is that sellers are taking it on themselves as to who gets opportunity to see their home. And any time that you have a judgment call or the potential for, well, in this case, yes, I would. In this case, no, I wouldn't. There's the potential for someone to feel discriminated against.
Yeah.
And that is the bigger issue, because fair housing is something that we as realtors have to abide by when we're listing, when we're selling, when we're buying with buyers. And that's not up for debate. That is hard line. You violate fair housing, that's a serious violation of your license law, as well as penalties that go along with that. They're typically 6 figures. I mean, that's a serious implication, right? You don't want to mess around with that. And even though it may be unintentional, not even at all the case, if I go to call Susie and Susie works for a particular brokerage and they're saying, well, for our brokerage, anybody that wants to show this house, we have an internal agreement. We already know what we're going to do. But anybody that's outside of that, well, we're not going to do the same. We're going to try to recoup some of that back on the backside. And so compensation is going to be different. Well, the first time I bring a buyer who is from a protected class, that's going to be the take, is because if they've done their due diligence and talked with a couple of agents, what if, and had these questions answered, and they get told this from one, but now they're being told from another, and it's all about the same property, you've got a potential issue that's going on there. It's just not as clean cut, easy. And the biggest thing I want to say is that our commissions that we've earned and fought for over the years, that we've done the service for the consumers, for the sellers, or for the buyers, isn't what has driven the house prices up. It's a benefit of what prices are increasing, but our typical charges haven't increased. Our expenses in order to do the job have increased. Our expenses on what we pay out in order to be an independent contractor, small business owner, under a big brokerage or small brokerage or any of that, all of those prices have increased, but we haven't come back to the market and gone to a 10% listing agreement, right? It's only increased in value because the home prices have increased in value. And when we have shows that are glamorizing what our industry does and make it look easy because they never do paperwork and they show up in, designer clothes and far out cars and all of this stuff, and the only thing that pops up is this $1,125,000 that they're going to make on it. It's like, well, that seems ridiculous. We aren't in that market. We're the Midwest. We don't have a $25 million listing, and when we do, it does make news. But there's a lot that goes into that. So I think it's easy for people to say, oh, they're the bad guys. Oh, this is going to fix the problem. But the reality is that what problem we were trying to fix, if we were fixing something, we went about it the wrong way. And it's the consumers that are going to pay that price.
So I hope that the only thing you have to do is unlock the door. I hope that the entire transaction goes so easy that you don't have to fight on my behalf for something that comes up in an inspection or a short appraisal or something that we don't know when we sign those original documents. And so I feel like that they were making it sound, they being like the media or, the word that was being put out there about this to the consumer was being told that all realtors do is unlock the door and they're getting this paycheck for doing nothing.
Right.
And if you have $1 million house and that you're paying $30,000 at 3%, like I could see where, that seems like it's a lot of money just to open a door. But there's so much more that goes into it that was never communicated. Right. And until you have bought and sold multiple homes, you don't know that all goes into the transaction.
Well, and I will say that, as a realtor profession, we have failed in telling our story and talking about those things that we actually do. Because it's so easy, especially with social media. It's so easy. You put up the just listed and, under contract in less than 6 hours or whatever, right? Or it's under contract in 2 days or 2 weeks, whatever it is. The false perception is, that's easy. Anybody could do it. This is why when the market is great, and people think all you have to do is put a sign out in the yard in order to sell the house, people flooded in to become a realtor. I've been in this long enough to know there are times when the market is up and there are times when the market is down, and I have to work all the time. So I know what my value is. I know what I bring to the table, and I try to impart that to my clients when I meet with them for the first time. They know why they want to hire me, right? But if I failed to do that and the transaction is smooth and easy, then you get why somebody would feel, well, you made $5,000 off of that. Wow, you showed me one house and it was easy. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
And I can say over the course of 23 plus years, it's rare that it happens that way because, like I said, I've been at the table where it was the difference of the cost of the home warranty that the seller didn't have the funds in order to give anything more. And it was the make or break decision for the buyer. I'll pay for it. Just go ahead and take it off of our commission. I've done that in situations where you want to keep the deal together. Do I have to give money out of my pocket in order for the buyer and seller to agree for what they need to do? No. But I may have been the only option in order to keep the deal together. But here we are getting that bad rap when it really wasn't deserved, and it really isn't what created the problem that's out there. If somebody failed to do their job, hold that realtor accountable. Yeah. Send them to the licensing and have them do continuing education or have them pay a penalty. Or the buyer or the seller, guess what? They have the ability to file a claim against that realtor if they actually felt it. Why make the whole industry suffer as a result? And I'm not, I don't care about the realtors who have to suffer because of the changes. Change is inevitable. It happens. But you are making the people who would be potentially first-time buyers or a seller who needs to downsize so that they can take care of a family member, or life change and now a single mom and her kids can't afford to get into a house. I can tell you every transaction that I have had over these years had a personal, solid story as to why I was at bat and going to work for that client, right? And I'm an advocate for them. You don't pay me to be your advocate. I'm getting paid for the services that I'm doing, but that's who I am. And so, yeah, I take it a little personally to feel like, well, that was an easy transaction. I don't really think you made your money. Okay, let's have the conversation. How many emails did I send on your behalf? If I were an attorney and I got to charge you for my billing time every time you texted me, every time you called me, and by the way, those are in 15-minute increments usually. It's not actually just because it took a minute to send. They have a billing minimum requirement. If we were doing that, we would never get compensated enough for what we do.
Yeah.
And by the way, one easy deal doesn't even begin to make up for the 10 difficult ones where you don't get to go and do what your family was planning to do because now you have to deal with an inspection issue. You have to talk your client off of the ledge. You have to work with a combative agent who doesn't get why you're trying to both make the deal happen. You don't have to make the calls to the city to find out why did this inspection not pass for a city pre-sale? When this wasn't an issue for the seller who's lived there for 20 years, but now you're going to penalize the buyer. There are 1,000 different things that actually can come up in a transaction. And like you said, you're lucky if you don't have it.
Yeah.
But your realtor should be there, and you as the client need to know that your realtor is going to go to bat for you, and you're not haggling over, well, now that I have to go through and have this conversation and I have to talk to this government official, we need to talk about my commission because now I need to charge you more. Hello, you have just allowed an a la carte fee schedule to potentially be what you're dealing with. So if you're not obligated as a buyer to buy a house, but you agree that I'm going to get compensated if you do, well then, am I going to charge you every time we go out and look at houses? Because I'm using my car, my gas, I'm taking away my time that otherwise I would be spending somewhere else. Maybe someone else was willing to pay me for it. So you start adding in all of these different layers of where it's subjective on if you're going to get the service or not, and how am I going to get paid for that.
Yeah.
I think it was a far better system knowing that there was compensation agreed and this is what it was, and that worked for your client or it didn't work for you, and you made it happen. You still did the job.
Yeah.
We'll see. I think there's still going to be shakeup. I think that there's still going to be some fallout from all of this. People are going to realize, wait a minute, sellers are going to be sitting on the market longer because instead of the 100 people, only 10 are coming through. So if you are lucky and you get 10% of the showings to make an offer, so we showed it 100 times, so we get 10 offers. Well, we only get 10 showings, now we get 1 offer.
Yeah.
Guess what? Now you're going to feel the pinch as the seller side, and as the buyer side, agents are going to be charging you for this and that and everything else, or what am I assured to be able to get? Because if you don't have to buy a house, then I'm not guaranteed to get paid anything. Whereas at least if I know I show you this house and we write on it, I know what I'm going to get paid.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It'll be interesting.
Still to be determined, huh?
It's only been in effect for
couple of days,
a week, yeah. So if you had a tip for a fellow real estate professional, what would your tip be for this to end this episode?
Well, for the real estate professionals, it is really important not to violate this agreement. So they are looking for any reason to come back at us as an association, the DOJ. And I know on TikTok and some of these formats, there have been conversations about, well, if I use this and I do this and I use this color, then it means this. If you do something like that, you are setting us up for yet another battle in already a difficult market with already financial economic changes that are affecting not only us, but our clients. I think if you open that door and you act in an unprofessional manner, you're going to make all of us suffer yet again. So as a professional to another professional, just answer your phone or send a text or do what is legally able to be done, and make sure that you're addressing the client that you're dealing with and informing them, communicating, so that we can inform and communicate with our clients and have a smooth, easy transaction, hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Well, it'll be interesting.
Thanks for joining us today on the Realty Podcast. If you enjoyed the knowledge and entertainment today, please subscribe and share with your friends. We will be embarking on a journey that bridges the gap between realtors and clients, uncovering the heart and tea of real estate.